Hello and welcome to For Pets' Sake, Feeding Them Well. I'm Lisa Faulkner, and in this series, we're diving into the world of pet nutrition, exploring what we feed our pets, why it matters, and how it impacts their health, happiness, and overall well-being. Today, we're joined by someone whose research is changing the way we think about pet nutrition, Dr. Anna Hielm-Björkman. She's a leading veterinary researcher from the University of Helsinki, renowned for her studies into raw feeding and its impact on canine health. Her work with the Dog Risk Project is helping pet owners and professionals alike rethink what we feed our dogs and why it matters. Anna, welcome.
Thank you.
Anna, first of all, I have to ask you, do you have any pets?
Well, a veterinarian without the pets, I don't think they exist really. But yes, so I have two mixed breed dogs,
Right?
and I have a parrot, which is now about 20 years old. And I have, at the moment, usually during the summer, I have 4 chickens and 1 rooster,
Fantastic.
just to get fresh eggs.
Oh, lovely. That's the way to do it.
Yeah.
In London, not so good because of the foxes. But I one day, that's one of my dreams.
Yes.
So I'm really excited to delve into all of this with you. And it's fascinating when you think about our pets, not just as companions, but as biological beings with specific needs. And your research really encourages us to look at dogs through a scientific lens, doesn't it?
Science really helps us, dog owners and cat owners and pet owners, to know what we should do. And I think that one of the problems has been that there has been very little research on dog food and cat food, and mostly it has been done within the industry. And like industry usually does, they don't really put out things that they think are proprietary kind of knowledge that they use for their own recipes and things. So we've seen very little research on pet food
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I was just talking to you before we started recording.
Yeah.
And obviously you, Brendan, have been advocating raw food, a raw food diet for dogs for 25 years. And you said exactly the same.
Yes, I think that both of us with Brendan, we've been kind of in a space of trying to do a bit more species appropriate for a longer time, and being I had my own practice for 15 years before I went into academia again to kind of get a lot of answers to a lot of questions I had. So just seeing as a normal vet, when you have like people coming in with their pets and the same diseases like every 3 months and every 3 months, and you get so frustrated because you can't cure them.
Right.
You just kind of give them, for symptoms, you give them medicine, and that's good, and it takes away all the clinical signs, but only for a while because you never go into the root cause. And so I think that both Brendan and me were kind of more interested in diving into trying to figure out really how you could try to cure a patient from a disease. And also then afterwards, I wanted to actually not have any dogs that have these diseases. So I went into preventive kind of research.
And is that the Dog Risk Project?
Yeah, so that's so for the last, I think we started actually in 2003. So we've been going on for 22 years. And first it was just like student work, and it was my own PhD. And so we were doing kind of small projects and trying out nutraceuticals and for different diseases, and kind of doing clinical studies like these very strict randomized clinical studies to see, between 2 groups, somebody was given a placebo and somebody was given something else, and to see what happened. And the more research you do, actually, as a researcher, you realize that you actually get more and more questions.
Yes.
And not more and more answers. So you get some answers, but it just opens up for so much more.
And so what led you to this was seeing how you could fix a dog, not fix a dog, but you could cure an animal for a little bit of time, but then they go back, they're eating whatever they're eating, and there must be a way. So when you say nutraceuticals, No, when you say nutraceuticals, I've never heard that before. I've heard obviously pharmaceutical, and straight away it makes me go, well, of course, what you're looking at is what they're eating, is what their diet is why they are getting these illnesses.
Totally. So nutraceuticals is kind of, it comes from nutrition, of course. So it can be parts of their diet, it can be supplements, it can be type of diets, it can be, so it's kind of the way of curing them, like you said, with diets.
How have you discovered, I suppose, that it was raw food?
Well, actually, I did not know at all what I was going to find. So, from a clinical kind of idea, I had seen it in my clinical practice for a long time that if I changed the diet from somebody that had epilepsy, I had about 30% of the epilepsy patients that were totally fine after that and never got a seizure again. So, I mean, it really strikes as odd.
What does change? What does change in an animal?
Well, the thing is that what we've seen in our research, for example, if I take the first ones that we were looking into, were the atopy, allergy type of like chronic skin conditions in dogs, which is rampant. I mean, every second dog you see is scratching, and either it can be between the digits, or it can be the ears, or it can be somewhere else. So
Rory sometimes has a bit here. I call it her armpit sometimes.
yeah. Well, actually, it is in the armpits
Yeah.
very often also, and very often we talk about like allergy, which is one type where you have like a certain type of immunity, like IgE going up. So it's one type, and then you have like food sensitivity, and then you have like humans also have like some kind of celiac disease, IBD, like very inflammatory bowel diseases that actually come out also in the skin. So when we were looking at first the skin things, we started by doing a questionnaire. So that's kind of a survey that you give to a lot of people. And then because I wanted to be able to see what they have been eating all of their life, and especially when they were like, when the mummy was pregnant, when she was lactating, when the puppies were still in the whelping box, like their first solid foods. And then when they moved to the next family, what they were giving, and, what they were eating until they grew adult. And most of these diseases, like the skin diseases, they erupt when they are kind of just very young adults. And so you can't look at what they are eating when they were adults, but you can look like what happened before.
Right.
And so in these surveys that we did, we just saw that by doing something you called epidemiology, you use these regression analysis, like statistical ways of seeing which things associate with getting the disease. And in all of our models, we saw these two types of diets being significant. So one was a significant risk, and the other one was always a significant kind of protecting factor. So then we did more and more diseases, and one of the things that kind of show that what we see is quite right is that if you look at dogs hit by a car, or having a trauma from falling down a balcony or something else, actually the food doesn't have any associations with these diseases.
Yeah.
But we have a big group of diseases that are kind of chronic metabolic diseases that we think are now, that has to do with immunity, with oxidative stress, which is something in the body that gets really stressed for very, very different reasons, but one of them being diet.
Right.
And then also that the inflammatory kind of response in these dogs are very high, and you can kind of decrease them with food.
And with raw food.
And with raw food, yeah.
So when you were saying that you were looking at two different types of two studies and two surveys, and there was one set of animals that were eating one diet and another eating another diet. Can you sort of explain without, I don't know, not talking about brands necessarily, but talking about what was the difference in the diet?
We actually looked at 4 different type of foods, because when we did some analysis of what people were feeding, you have kind of people feeding mostly just kind of normal kibble, which is like the dry food.
Yeah.
Then you have people in Finland, quite a lot of people giving raw food, which is just like either buying a complete and balanced raw food that you can buy in the store, but it's kind of frozen.
Yeah.
So it's never been processed more than kind of just minced and mixed. And then we have one type of family that would cook food, like gently cooked normal human type of food, like pasta and rice and potatoes and cooked meat and cooked fish and a bit of egg and vegetables and things. And then the 4th type is the ones that give what's left from the human kind of your own plates, and they cook for themselves and their dog. So it's kind of a human diet totally. And the ones that we could see where there was a significant difference were the ones where you had the raw food, which was nearly in all of our studies has been protective, and then the dry food, the kibble food, has been a risk factor.
Right.
Yeah.
And so in raw food, what have you noticed the benefits are with dogs? Just, I suppose for me, I know that I'm starting Rory on my raw food journey. She's been on a fresh food journey for quite a while, and before then she was on dry food. She was on kibble. I thought I was feeding her good food for my dog. I sort of think, oh gosh, I was a bad parent.
You shouldn't feel bad about it at all, but I'm really glad that you're on a very good path now.
Yes, I feel like we found the path, but also I have, the things that you notice straight away are their poo.
Yeah.
Please, if you can sort of explain the real benefits, I'd love to know them.
Well, we've been looking at very much more than we have published, but we've published articles about the type of diet that are protecting, and which is raw and so that is for allergy and atopy, in otitis, which is the ear infections. It's also the chronic gut problems. There's, like you said, the dental health. And so we actually didn't have a question about gum infections and things. The only question we asked the owners was about tartar or calculus, which is kind of the what we call kind of a teeth stone, or very calculus on the teeth. And I mean, it was the questions that we had are things that we think that owners should be able to kind of report on. So they know if their dogs are scratching, they know if their poo is runny, they know if they have gas and things like that. They know if they have dental calculus. So we've chosen kind of things that we know that owners, because they come to me and Brendan, knowing that they phoned us up and say that, hey, we should come in because I see my dog has tartar now.
I think a lot of pet owners
Yeah.
are scared. People
Totally.
are really frightened of feeding them raw food. What happens with bacteria?
So it's really important, you talk about that worry about bacteria. Many people will come across that. And there's a really great research piece done by Anna, and also North Point Pets backed it up over in America. Anna, do you want to just reiterate those findings?
Yes, being a vet and getting the results we got on raw feeding, I very much realized that we have to do some studies on kind of the pathogen risks of feeding raw before we start publishing anything, because that will be kind of the most important things for vets, that they need to know that it's not really dangerous. So we've published 3 different papers on pathogens in raw feeding dogs, and one of them, the one Brendan was referring to, is a survey that went kind of really nicely viral. So we got people from 81 countries and about 17,000 households answering about how they use raw food for their pets. And so we had about 90,000 pet years of risk, which is like, some people were reporting from several dogs, and from, like having 5 dogs in the family, and from 13-year-old dogs. And so you kind of get a big number of years, how much there is like that you can account for that risk.
Yeah.
So we found in these 17,000 households, there was 3 cases where it had been shown that there was a transmission from the dog food to a family member, giving them some kind of gastrointestinal disease.
Right.
Nobody died, nobody went to a hospital, but they were doing this and they got the same bacteria. So it's very, very seldom it happens. And we were, from a colleague of ours who wanted to know that, could you do that, the calculation in how many pets' meals
Yes.
you have to have one kind of transmission from a dog food, raw food, going to a human in the family. So there was about 21 million and something dog meals that had to be done before you'd get the next one.
That's incredible, isn't it?
There were some particular bits within the research that came up. There was like, actually, did you know that having your kid go to nursery is more of a risk to your family of disease than feeding raw? Yeah, there was some other great parts to do with that. Actually, the majority of those that had a food transmission were feeding waste food from the fridge as part of the diet.
Yeah.
And actually, conversely, something that's great for you if you're starting on a raw journey is that if you feed over 50% raw to your pet, the whole family's health has improved within that survey.
So, Anna, what does the research tell us about feeding raw as puppies?
The research seems to point towards feeding raw as puppies as being possibly protective. We've looked at atopy, which is a skin disease. We've looked at tartar, which is kind of teeth.
Like the build-up.
Yeah, build-up, yes.
Yeah.
So it starts with plaque and then it goes into tartar, and then in not always, but sometimes it goes then into gum disease if it's very close to the gums. And then also in chronic gastrointestinal diseases. And what we've seen is that a lot of the different, we've looked at it kind of 2 ways. Some of our studies have been looking at really small ones, like going back to what the mother was eating when she was pregnant and lactating, and then the puppy when it was really small and getting up to adulthood. And when they're really small and the dam, the bitch, the mother dog, we were looking only at kind of diet groups, like if they were eating raw foods or if they were eating dry foods.
Okay.
But then when they were a bit older, we had data on what type of food items. So that there would have been like raw meat, raw fish, raw egg, and also cooked meat, cooked fish, cooked eggs. So what we've seen is that as a raw diet as a whole is already potentially protective, whereas the dry foods, and in our data, we actually do have the names of all different dry foods that they've been eating, but we've just looked at them as like a big group, like raw or dry.
So when you say that raw meat, raw fish, raw
Yeah.
eggs,
Yeah.
and cooked meat, fish, and eggs,
Yeah.
if you're cooking it fresh at home, do they not get a benefit because it's still cooked? It takes stuff out of it? Is that what you, or
Yes, well, actually, what it looks like in some of these chronic diseases is that as soon as you start thermally kind of heating it up in
Right.
some kind of ways, just think about it as when you put an egg in your frying pan,
yeah,
like quite early on, it already starts, like the white starts to be white
yeah,
and getting like really stiff,
mm,
and you can easily take it out from it when it's cooked. So really already at temperatures going over 40, 50, 60 degrees, then protein parts start to change.
right.
And what we've seen in lots of human food publications where they've looked at fish or meats or things, you can see that the amino acid kind of structure and the amounts of them change when you heat up food. So what would be now kind of next steps would be to really look at dog food and cat food and the different ones, because we know that the dry food is very ultra processed. It's very often it's made of meal, like bone and meat meal, and then it's like a cookie more. It's like a
Yeah.
biscuit. So you put all of these things together that are already very processed, and then you make them into a dough and you put them through an extruder and they come out as these small kibbles. So they've been changed so many times. And another thing that we know that happens, and that has been actually looked by other researchers of these what we call Maillard products. It's like the brown thing that we love on our bread or when
Right,
we
okay.
fry things. We
Yes,
really
the
like it.
crispy
Yeah, and we
bit.
all know that we shouldn't eat a lot of like charcoal grilled things because it's carcinogenic. But like the dog food, there's studies saying that they can be 33 times more, have kind of these Maillard products than human food. There's one study saying that there's 142 times more in dog foods that there is in human foods. So all of these, and we have some colleagues that are doing research on these Maillard products. They're also called AGEs and ALEs, advanced glycogated end products. And so people know that they're carcinogenic, that they cause cancer in humans. But there's new research also on humans saying that they also may cause obesity, autoimmune diseases. We're part of a Helsinki One Health team.
Yeah.
And so we're looking at all the diseases that dogs and humans have in common.
Right.
So that's why we're interested. We've been looking at things like atopy and chronic like gut
Digestive,
issues
yeah.
and epilepsy and diabetes and cancer and all of these things.
Yeah, I have noticed noticed a couple of friends of mine whose dogs have had cancer or
Yeah.
lymphoma, which is a cancer as well.
cancer,
And
yes.
I'd never really heard of it before. I had, but I
Yeah.
think it seems to have got a lot more. It seems a lot more prevalent in our
Totally.
animals now.
Yes.
And you've got to remember, a lot of our pets' foods over the last few decades has actually mirrored a lot of our foods with
Yes.
processing, and we've been accepting convenience over health so much that we've just ignored some of the crises, the health crises that have been happening. You know, we've seen them in ourselves, we see the reports on the news, but alongside that, what is the only other animal on the planet that has the same, if not slightly worse, crises in health is our pet dogs. And that's because of this resorting to a convenience, thinking that convenience was the optimum way of feeding our pets, rather than actually thinking about healthy food.
Well, yes, and also I have to say, you say about convenience, but we also, I think, as a nation, or we sort of do what we're told. And if
Yeah.
somebody says, a company says, well, this is good, this is good for you, even with things you see, you know, in human food, or it's low fat, or it's got your part of your 5 a day, and there are all these slogans that you hear and you think, well, that must be healthy. And the same for your dog. You know, I'd read my dog food and I'd think, well, that's
Yeah.
got packed with vitamins and minerals and nutrients, and you go, well, that's fine. So it's very,
Blueberries and
yes,
oils and everything. Yeah.
yeah. And it's really interesting, because actually what you're saying is we don't need any of that.
But actually, when you start to look in and see the disease and see that you can resolve disease and prevent disease by feeding better, and you start to look into that, you understand that actually there is another way. And anybody who's in the food industry for humans can see the same. They talk a lot, you know, many cookery programs about making fresh. Think
Of
about,
course,
you know,
yeah.
what's going on with your food, what you're putting in the dish. Do you recognize the ingredients on the label? You know, what of those can cause disruption to your gut and cause
Yeah.
inflammation? All of that is coming out now, and we're being much more mindful about what we're putting into ourselves and therefore into our pets.
Yeah. So we can change our dog's diet at any age, then, you're saying? It doesn't matter that Rory is 8.5. There's no worries about moving her from her fresh food to raw food.
There would be a bit of worry if you wouldn't.
I love that. Okay. So
Yeah.
it will really extend her
Yes.
life. In your with your research, that's what you found.
So you might have something that we called homocysteine, which is a kind of a bad thing. We have kynurenin, which is a marker for cancer. All of these we see going up when we give them dry food. Whereas when you give them raw food, there's nearly nothing happening in the body. It's like totally calm. It's like
That's
there's
amazing.
nearly nothing happening. And the things that happen in the atopy study, for example, was that we had more oxidative stress being kind of dampened, so it was decreasing. Inflammation was decreasing. We had the immune system was more activated. And so these were 8 genes that we could see that were, so that's gene expression. It's not genes that you're kind of born with, you are, but it's the diet putting them on instead of having them off. So actually in these clinical studies, we can really see what happens inside the body. And that in that way, we can validate the things that we find in these questionnaires and see that it totally makes sense what we find in these. And when you just think about if she's now getting a better diet, you'll have the total switch in her metabolism of what's happening.
You know, I love to hear a scientist talk about, you know, the science, but also be super cautious about giving definitives. And I've been to many of Anna's talks, and there is, you know, you asked earlier about benefits for puppies.
Yeah.
There is, you know, so many things. If you're feeding your puppy between 2 and 6 months of age, raw food feeding, from improved dentition and lower risk of periodontal disease in later life, improved reduced risk of osteoarthritis and hip conditions, reduced risk of IBD, so inflammatory bowel disease, so inflammation within the gut, reduced risk of skin disease, that's allergies like atopy, all of these benefits, let alone reduction in obesity that comes about.
So you very rarely see an overweight dog that's fed raw
Yeah.
food.
I mean, look, you overfeed anything.
Of course, and dogs
You
are the
know.
worst for
Yeah.
it.
But
I
especially
suppose
my
it really.
Labradors.
Yeah. But I
Labradors have a
suppose.
gene for it.
Oh, do they?
Yeah.
But I suppose if you had a dog that was overweight, it's a very good way of.
Well, the great thing is with raw food, satiation, so that's about how full you feel, is much easier to achieve if you're feeding an appropriate amount of protein and fat. What happens when you eat high levels of carbohydrate is you have a feast and famine situation. The classic we see with kids being fed cereal
with
in the
us, yes,
morning,
yeah.
where you feed them, they get the addictive hit of the sugar rush, and then their insulin kicks in. That stores all of those sugars as fats, and then all of a sudden they crash, usually at about 10 o'clock on a school day, and their concentration goes. They're unable to cope because they're feeling starving again. They're waiting for the break time to get to the tuck shop to eat another Mars bar. But that's what you're doing. If you feed high carbohydrate meals, you'll end up with this feast and famine, this peak and crash, and they're hungry again. So they overeat.
I think I feel as I sit here, I think, oh gosh, I feel so bad, and I feel that as parents, you feel bad, and our parents brought us up eating cereal because that's what we were told.
Yeah.
And it's only as you're getting more and more research and you actually look into it that you see, it's not something to beat yourself up about.
No.
You only do what you can do. But once you're aware, it's sort of like the lights have all switched on and you go, well, I can never go back now. That's it.
And
Where
that's
you
what we're
can.
trying to do for,
Yes.
For your
owners.
chocolate and your glass of wine every
Yeah,
once in a
every
while.
now and then. Absolutely.
But it's absolutely what we're trying to also show, that all of that stuff that people are coming to realization for their kids is just as applicable for their dogs and cats.
And actually that brings me to one of the things that we have still such a lot of things that we have to do in research. And for one thing, for example, that when we've been comparing dogs that eat raw food and dry food, is that, for example, one thing that you see now in research in humans is that when we were looking at feeding a dog dry matter, about 50% fat and 0% carbohydrates. They had actually 5% of vegetables and things in the food, but because it's raw, it's actually not really used at carbohydrates. It's more like fiber. Okay. And then comparing that to 17% fat in a dry food diet. And when we were looking at the blood samples of those, what has been kind of said about, for example, cholesterol, is that if you eat a lot of fat, then that goes up. Yeah. So that has been kind of debunked in the human literature. Now
has it now? Because I'm
Totally.
told two different things by
Yes.
one by a hormone doctor who says
Yeah.
you can eat that fat wise it's fine,
Yeah.
and my GP who says completely differently.
Totally, and it would be the same if you go to a vet.
Okay.
But for our hundreds of dogs that we've looked at, eating loads of fat, so the cholesterol goes down when you eat a lot of fat, and it goes up with the dry food where you eat very little fat.
Yeah.
And so that's one kind of where I think that we can help also the human medicine, is by kind of helping them debunking things that are not true.
What are any myths that you would sort of want to bust about raw food?
Well, I think that we've touched on them as well, but I think maybe there's several. One, that raw food would in any way be dangerous.
Yeah.
So everything, both our studies and other people's studies, I've been looking into the literature yearly and sometimes many times a year to try to find even one 100% certain association between a dog eating raw food in the family and somebody getting sick. So I would say there's about 20 articles at least that say that there's a risk, but just say that it's a potential risk. They don't show any data on it. Then there would be maybe at least 10 articles where they have suspected a risk, but they all end with saying that no association could be shown, and that we're just reporting this because this could have been a kind of a certain risk. And I'm yet to find, and I'm happy whoever listens to this, if they will send me articles, because I need them. I teach students, so I'm always trying to find at least one that would be like that. This is totally certain.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
it would have happened.
Yeah. You're
And
happy to question.
Yes, totally. I must say, personally, I love it when I'm wrong. Because that actually, if you think you're going to find something and you find something totally different, you learn so much more. And there's so much more questions that have to be answered. So I love it.
So as a pet owner, you walk into a pet store and you can see all types of food. And, a lot of the dry food says for dental health, for digestion, added fibre. And it is a sort of minefield, because you go, well, is that what I should be having? Because I think, oh, she's had a bit of a funny digestion, or she definitely needs more fibre, or, urinary tract. I've seen a lot of that as well. What is that? Should I be looking at that and worrying and using it for different things?
So what happens when you create a food that's based around effectively a plant cereal that's going to be naturally deficient for a carnivore in many things? So what's happened is that companies have ended up having to add product back in, a little bit like a children's cereal, going back to that one, where you suddenly see it's fortified with loads of vitamins, because cereal on its own, without that fortification, isn't really that nutritious.
Yeah.
And so we see that in pet foods. What you then find is that up crops a disease, and they work out that maybe that diet is deficient in something. I need to add something. And then they call it extra fiber for, constipation diet. Let's just make up a diet for the sake of the argument here. And, before you know it, they've got a special diet, and they can use up another line on the shelf. Well, actually, if you get the food right and you're using biologically appropriate foods for your pet, and you're giving all of that good nutrition, you shouldn't need individual additives, because you're not going to be giving a nutrient deficient diet. You're going to have all of those great nutrients locked in to that raw diet.
It makes total sense. It really does. And Anna, I have to ask you, how do you hope that the future of pet food evolves?
I hope that there's both going to be a realization that a dog, for example, isn't so much different from a human being, so that it will be okay in people's mind to give them fresh food. So that's one thing that I hope, that when you go back to kind of fresh foods, seasonal foods, changing diets, and so that will kind of help. Then what I hope for the veterinary profession is that we will have a kind of a veterinary talk about nutrition, not from the industry, not from the raw side, not from the dry side, but that we would be talking about research done on nutrition and seeing where that takes us, and then using that as the evidence-based model of how we look at nutrition. So far, since kind of big dog food has been kind of in the making, they have actually been the ones that have been teaching the veterinary students and the veterinary technicians about the food, which is not really how it should be. It's like we shouldn't have McDonald's coming into the medical schools and teaching them about nutrition either. So we don't have a lot of history of teaching nutrition to pets. We actually learn a lot about nutrition to production animals because that's important for the human food chain. But we learn very little in the curriculum about pet food. And we learn quite a lot from reps coming in and teaching us about the latest foods that they've produced. And for decades, the only research that there was all sponsored or done by the industry. So I think that this is something that I really hope that the veterinary profession would kind of stand up to this challenge and take kind of ownership of knowing what is good. And that's totally the same, I think, for the human side. So we work now together with the States and with New Zealand and with Holland, where they have groups that are looking at similar things, just to try to, get people doing the same type of things, so that I think that one day, I don't know, I'm maybe too old, so I don't know if I'll see it when I'm still kind of in my working age, but I know that one day I'll kind of wake up, and then all of a sudden all of my colleagues will say that, I've always known that, fresh food is much healthier, that, I was just, I just needed the evidence for it. So it's waiting for that day.
Yeah, the gut feeling,
Yeah.
as it's known. And
Yeah.
talking about research, obviously, I have to ask you, is there any research that you're working on at the moment that you can tell us about?
Yes, I can't really tell about the results we have yet because they haven't been published, but we have a clinical study on obese dogs and overweight dogs and normal dogs on 2 different diets, again, a raw and a dry diet. And so that's going to be very interesting. And then we're actually in the making of doing both dog risk and cat risk, which is, so we're making new English speaking really big surveys that we hope to get more than 1 million people answering for us. But we also know that a lot of people, they really want to help us researchers and help their pets by helping us. So there will be $1 million chance next year when we will get our very big questionnaire out, which will be called Dog Risk 2.0. That will be called Dog Risk 2.0, which is the next step. And we're going to send this out to actually 5 different continents. So it's going to be in English, and you can really help by being a kind of a citizen researcher by just answering the questions. It'll take a long time, but you will really help, and you will help, if not your pet that you have now, your next pet.
I feel like I've had so many questions answered. I feel like I've come out with the lights all on. I suddenly feel, it really is amazing, and to hear all of your research and your findings, just fascinating. So thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us here today on For Pet's Sake. If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. And of course, don't forget to follow Bella+Duke on all the usual channels like Instagram and TikTok. If you're considering a new diet for your pet, head over to bellaandduke.com to get your own personalised nutrition plan.